This is the Finlos Lives podcast. Welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me. There's a few things I'm going to cover in this episode. First, Eva made a few comments in response to the Holiday Magic episode, and I'll share her audio from SpeakPipe, and I'll add my own thoughts and comments to the points that she raises. Second, listener and friend Andre shared his thoughts and questions in response to my review of The Last Ronin. Then, in light of the new year and the practice of setting new goals, I will share some thoughts on New Year energy and how not to lose momentum when we feel pulled in so many potential directions. Finally, I'll discuss what we've been watching. In this episode, I'll be talking about HBO's adaptation of His Dark Materials. To get us started, here's Eva's audio.
Hey, so I wanted to mention a couple of things. One, that we didn't get to cover the indigenous origins of Santa, which we have recently impressed upon the kids as we work to decolonize our own mindsets and investigate our own indigenous origins, both via our ads. And second, the discussions about the elf on the shelf as a form of surveillance and punishment that ignores some complexity, including that it ignores the responsibility of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to teach their kids that surveillance exists, will target them, and how to navigate those dangers.
I appreciate those comments and want to explore these ideas further. First, as I mentioned in the prior episode about Holiday Magic, I went into detail a little bit about how Eva and I chose to raise our kids when it comes to holiday traditions and why it's important to us to include history and context for some of these traditions. And as Eva raises those points, I do think it's important to explore some of the more specific history of these characters that we weave into our traditions. Sharing the history of these things does a lot of positive as well. It deepens the meaning and the value of the traditions that we hold. It links the present with the past and gives generations something to carry into the future, and then they can add their own little bits and pieces to the traditions. Understanding where we've come from helps us to remember that things aren't created in a vacuum, and that includes traditions. And then, as a value item, knowing the history of where these cultural traditions come from helps us to delineate the consumerist aspects and separate that from the actual tradition. So with all of those things in mind, Eva thought, and I agree, that it's important that we kind of look into where this tradition of Santa Claus comes from, since the character is such a large part of the tradition that we celebrate in our house and that is so popular across the world. And it's interesting because the person that we celebrate as Santa, like most traditions and rituals, is very likely a blending of things from different places. The origin of Santa Claus as we see it in the Christmas celebration is likely based on a Greek Christian bearded monk named Saint Nicholas of Myra, who is historically known as being a very charitable person, that he would give valuable items to the people in his community. And then the Dutch Sinterklaas, who is the patron saint of children, who is noted to have donned a red cape and rode a white horse on the day of that St. Nicholas, which is December 6th, would ride to visit children and then record their behaviors in a big red book. And so when we think about these two potentially historical figures, they combine very nicely to blend and form this sort of Christian-centered celebration around the birth of Jesus. They tie it all together very nicely. But what if there is more to this story of Santa? And if you were on social media this past holiday season, you may have encountered a trending truth check, and much of that chatter can be traced to an animated film on YouTube. The Atlantic magazine highlighted this YouTube film and its creator, and here is a short excerpt from The Atlantic on the origin or the potential alternate origin of Santa. And here's a quote. "But maybe there's another story worth telling this season, one about a psychedelic mushroom-eating shaman from the Arctic. That's Matthew Salton, whose animated short film, Santa is a Psychedelic Mushroom, presents a different origin story entirely, It's a compelling narrative backed by Harvard professors, anthropologists, and esteemed mycologists alike, and it bears an uncanny semblance to the modern tradition of Santa Claus. So that's from The Atlantic, and I'll include links to both the film and the article so you can read up on this if you're interested. But the story goes that on the winter solstice, the Sami, who are the indigenous people of the Lapland, which is the frigid Arctic region of northern Finland, they would be visited by shamans on the winter solstice. These shaman would be carried by sleighs who were also pulled by reindeer. Because this is in the Arctic regions of northern Finland and Norway and Sweden and Russia, many of the homes that they would visited, the main entrances would be snowed in, so they would have to scurry down the chimneys of their hosts in these houses. The shaman would then perform healing rituals, they'd offer advice, and would serve as conduits to the spirit world. But all of this would be facilitated by the consumption of a red and white hallucinogenic toadstool mushroom, which is called the Amanita muscaria. This fungus was so important and sacred that the shamans would wear red and white suits to match the mushroom. And this Amanita muscaria mushroom is known worldwide for both its toxicity and its hallucinogenic properties. It even plays a large part in the Super Mario Bros. Video games created by Japanese game developer Shigeru Miyamoto for Nintendo in the 1980s. Salton shares this information not as a firm statement of fact for the origin of Santa, but rather to challenge the idea of a single source for the stories around which we build our lives. To remember that we all came from somewhere and someone, and those wheres and whos had their own stories that contributed to our own. So, just some fun food for thought when we think about Santa. The second point of what Eva raised brought up the curious relationship with the elf on the shelf and being raised in a surveillance state. This is especially important for people of color who are disproportionately negatively affected by law enforcement. This, of course, is pointing to the idea that the elf is watching to make sure that you are behaving or our children are behaving, and then they report those behaviors to Santa. As these elves on the shelves have become a little bit more common during the holidays, a lot of parents have called out how this reinforces the concept of a surveillance state. And maybe that instead we should have an expectation of privacy. The problem with these concerns is that they are largely coming from a single group, and it ignores the privilege that they have and how privacy favors those with power and wealth. It also ignores how surveillance and law enforcement harms minority groups disproportionately. The argument that they're bringing up is that it desensitizes us to the fact that we do live in a surveillance society and that we're constantly being monitored. But really what we should be saying is we need to be having these conversations with our kids. These are important conversations about how the systems we all use ubiquitously can and are used to track, to monitor, to follow, and to store countless points of data about who we are and the things we do online, when online is everywhere. So I think it's important that we remember that safety and security is a matter of position, perspective, and perception. And these are important conversations that parents of color are having with their kids because of the risk to harm that they and we are facing every day. So thank you, Eva, for raising both of these points about the importance of context in our traditions and of considering the cultural context for which we introduce new elements into our lives, even things as seemingly harmless as elves on the shelves or an elf on the shelf can have consequences, but can also yield really important and fruitful conversations with our children. Next, Andre wanted to hear my take on a couple of points from The Last Ronin, which I recently reviewed. And spoiler warning, I will be addressing a few things more in depth than I did in the actual review. So if you haven't had the chance to read the book and you do want to be surprised, then you might want to skip the next few minutes. But he observed, like I did, the distinction between a samurai and a ninja in Japanese culture, and wondered how those differences may have affected the idea of honor in the story. First, let's remember that the Ninja Turtles are characters created by two white men who adopted or appropriated, depending on how generous you feel, common Japanese pop culture tropes. So, who knows how much research they did or what experience they have. But that aside, I think this is a very important point to consider. Andre notes that how honor is defined in the story is a little muddy in the context of the conflicts. There are several points where the two descendants of Shredder, or Orokusaki, their names are Karai and Hiroto, act deceitfully with the intent of ending the Turtles and Splinter's lives. To this, Splinter notes that at least Shredder would have acted with honor and never attack while under the guise of truce or peace or parley. So in that sense, honor seems to be maintaining respect for your enemy by abiding by your word and agreements, even in times of war, something that neither Karai nor Hiroto do. But in another sense, Michelangelo, the title's Last Ronin, says that he is also in pursuit of honor for his family. And by this I think he means two things. One, in his relation to the title of Ronin, a samurai, and second, as redemption. And ultimately, I think both of these things have to do with redemption. In the original mythos, Splinter was the pet of Hamato Yoshi, who was rival to Orokusaki, and both were ninjas in the Foot Clan. As I said in my review, samurai are typically regarded in higher esteem than ninja, who are sometimes associated with criminal behavior or assassination. So not only were the turtles trained in the ways of ninja, the figurehead from whom their master Splinter learned was a member of the Foot before his eventual banishment, and the Foot are their lifelong enemies. So Michelangelo may be in pursuit of honor and redemption for his family, so that they may, at least symbolically, climb to the class of samurai and out from the dishonor of the Foot that they have in their own past. But additionally, and I think more meaningfully, I believe Michelangelo is striving for personal redemption. Andre notes that Mikey was the perpetual adolescent, carefree and somewhat reliant on the leadership and decision-making of his brothers. In many ways, he falls into a typical baby brother role. This is significant as we see in the flashbacks. It was always the other brothers who acted first to try to protect or rescue or strike. Even when those actions were foolhardy, Michelangelo, as their surviving brother, would see himself as the weak one, the failure, the baby. This even plays out as the voices of his dead brothers chide him for his immaturity and weakness while they were alive. These are, of course, Michelangelo's own voices of guilt, remorse, and self-doubt. But as a baby of 5 siblings myself, I can relate to the desire to want to be held as able and worthy when so much of my life, my experience has been to be treated as naive or less than capable. This story is so much about Michelangelo's need to prove himself and to the memory of his family that he is capable and worthy of their legacy, and even of honor. Thank you to Eva and Andre for these comments. Feel free to contact me if there is something you would like to add to the conversation from this or any episode of the podcast. And now for the subject of this episode, New Year energy. I'm always amazed by the human desire, or even need, to celebrate the completion of cycles. And what is a new year but the arbitrary celebration of a completed cycle? Is it arbitrary? Yes. But I guess it's still significant. And I genuinely believe that we need these regular intervals to help remind us to take stock on progress. And this progress could come in the form of goals that we've set for ourselves, relationships that we are developing and growing and nurturing, work and jobs, progress or regression, unfortunately, which sometimes happens, and whether or not we need to make some course corrections if there's new goals that we need to set, or if the things that we're working on aren't working for us, they don't feel right, or they don't make us happy. We can correct that course. So it's important to take stock on how the you that presents to people is aligned with the you who you want to be and the you who you actually are. I do fear that sometimes we focus so much on the things that we aren't and the things that we want to be, and forget to be the people who we are right now. That right now is just as important as where we've come from and where we're going. So, I think as we approach a new year, it is one of the, I suppose, socially accepted and normalized times for this sort of reflection. Reflection and genuine honesty with oneself is a little bit uncomfortable. It can be a terrifying thing to consider if the work that we're doing or the projects that we're engaging in or even who we've grown to become might not quite gel with those goals that we set from years past. But how often do we hear folks tell us that it's okay to course correct? That it's okay to reconsider the paths that we've chosen for our lives or the choices that we've made. And so it seems as if this is one of those times of year when it's okay to ask those questions. And even so often we focus on, I don't want to say unimportant things, but we don't consider the foundational elements, I think, enough. So let's do it. Let's genuinely review who we are and consider what can we do right now to be the person that we want to be. Eva has a great practice that she does every year where she will review all of the photos that she took throughout the year and journal about that prior year to make a list of everything that there is to be grateful for from the prior year from month to month. And this is such an amazing practice, one that I have never been able to commit to do because it takes a lot of diligence and it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of reflection to not only review the year through the pictures that we take, but also just to genuinely confront those moments of joy, because I think so much of the time we focus on the wrongs in our life, the ways that we are unhappy, the ways that we did not achieve, the ways that we feel like we need to grow, that we're pushed so much into that direction of negativity that almost it seems greedy to only focus on those positive things. And so it is definitely something that I've struggled with, but I am so amazed by that work that she does. And I think it also might lend itself to another practice, which would be not waiting for a full year and instead have a monthly check-in. Each month, measure the progress on the goals and projects that you've set for yourself. That way, it's a little bit more bite-sized. It's a little less insurmountable, we'll say. But here we are in the new year. We're already a couple weeks in. And of course, social media has been alight with de facto New Year's resolutions. And I think that this idea of setting goals can be both helpful and harmful, because we tend to set ourselves up with goals that are unreasonable and maybe even unnecessary. Eva and I were talking about the things that we've been seeing on social media, and she told me about the trend of setting a theme for the year rather than an individual goal or aim. And it's a theme that can then be implemented as a lifestyle change or a perspective shift in all of the things that you do. So again, as opposed to having, I want to lose 20 pounds, I will exercise more, I will be social more, I will brush my teeth 5 times a day, all of these bullet-pointed lists of things that we want to try to accomplish, you look at yourself and you consider what is a theme or mindset that you can approach this next cycle of time with and live that theme. And so my theme, what I've chosen to focus on this cycle, is enrichment or the deepening of experience. Not doing more, but doing more with the things I'm already doing. Making the things that I do meaningful and fulfilling. Not doing harm to myself by letting myself down with unmet goals. And instead, taking everything that I am doing in the present and finding a way to find joy in it and make it meaningful so that it's not simply a task on a to-do list, but something that enriches and enlivens my life. It seems like this New Year energy hits many people, and with it we get a sudden burst of energy. We are inspired, tons of creativity, lots of ideas, the desire to reinvent ourselves. It's easy to get overwhelmed because we want to feel like we're accomplishing. We want to take that momentum. We want to take that sudden burst of energy and do. We just want to do. And I know that I'm guilty of this. When I have a sudden burst of energy and creative drive, I can't settle. I can't focus. I can't do the things because they're all striving for, or they're all fighting for my attention. Everything. I want to do it all right now. I just want to be working on 7 things at one time. And so I'll start all 7 things and none of them will get done because you can't do that. You can't run 5 miles a day while you're emptying out every closet to throw things away, while you're being social with people in order to reinforce your friendships. You just can't do it all at the same time. So, in addition to this idea of what is the theme, I have created a list of tools for myself to sort of make sure that as I'm feeding on this burst of energy that I don't waste it, because energy is finite and there's only so much time that we can kind of spend on decision making when it comes to this, because the longer we hesitate, the more that energy burns. And thankfully it tends to be that once you find success, that it sort of becomes a perpetuating cycle. Success fuels success. But if we stumble and we miss things, then that energy burns faster. So this is what I'm doing, and it's nothing profound. It's nothing new. These are not my ideas. I cannot claim any of this. This is just what I'm doing to try to use, to try to capture and spend wisely this energy. I have a list of the things that I want to do that as they come to me, I write them down. Doesn't matter if they're stupid, if they're silly, if they're pipe dreams, whatever. If it comes to me, I write it down. And then I talk about it with people. I talk about it mostly with Eva, but I share these ideas with folks who I'm talking with. So this past year, this podcast has been just an amazing source of happiness and positivity for me, because I enjoy the process, but there's always things that I want to try to make it bigger and span different areas of creativity. And so I want to do a fiction aspect of the podcast where I take my old dreams of being a writer and create stories. I want to do video content, all of these different things. So I'm bouncing these ideas off of folks, and I have them written down. I'm making plans of action so that instead of focusing on the desire to do something, I'm focusing on the process of doing the thing. So if I want to create video content, then what's my workflow? What does my workflow need to look like? How can I adapt my podcasting workflow to augment or to accommodate video too? So that way I'm not starting from scratch. I'm using the tools that I already have. If I want to use the podcast to tell stories, what do I need for that? Do I need an additional actor? Do I need, who's going to write the stories? Am I the only writer? And all of these things. So I'm creating these processes and asking these questions and writing them down, and then getting feedback. And I think the hardest part of all of this is just remember to accept who you are. I need to accept who I am. And this is especially tough because we are sold this idea that there is always a better version of us who we could be. So again, instead of living in this moment right now with the success that we have and using that success, which is already in our grasp, to fuel our growth, we are constantly looking 20 steps ahead to see where we want to be and not looking to us we are right now. We are already that person 20 steps ahead. When we get there, that person will still be us. I am that person. So I don't need to fret about whether or not I get there. Because if I do, I'm still that person, and I'm that person right now. Instead, what do I need to do now to keep growing? What are the things that are bringing me joy? What are the things that I'm finding success with? Where can I begin to add to the things that work, to add more layers and more complexity and enrich those things? And that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm working on. I'm in the midst of that New Year energy, but it's because I'm seeking the things that I love and that bring me joy. And I'm working to see those things in the things I do every day and not just as special activities that are few and far between. And I wonder how many of our resolutions this year or past are based in the mindset of punishment for perceived failings. It's no wonder it seems so few people end the year where they hoped to be at the outset. And now for what we've been watching. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the series His Dark Materials, which was co-produced by HBO and the BBC. To begin, I have never read the trilogy of books for which this series is named and based upon. This is usually a good thing for adaptations because I have no preconceptions about plot or characters going in. I didn't even realize at first that the film The Golden Compass from way back when was related to it. Not that I saw that one either. In any case, my mind was a clean slate for this story, and all should have been well considering the production value and caliber of content created for the BBC and HBO in the past. And with the time and space of a 3-season show, roughly one for each of the novels, there should have been plenty of room to develop things. And to be fair, the show itself is beautifully produced with the epic vistas and dynamic wide shots that we have come to expect from our fantasy fare thanks to Peter Jackson and the Lord of the Rings films. Even the young actors chosen to play the leads carried their roles well. All too often, it was actually the adults who chewed the scenery and made for the cringe-worthy moments of the show. So that's really a long introduction and way of saying that the series is just fine. It's perfectly watchable. It's boringly high quality. It's very expensively safe. What it isn't, though, is all the way coherent. I have never been so content to watch roughly 30 hours of television while not really knowing what was going on for much of that time. I mean, I understand the things that were happening in any given scene. I get the relationships between characters. I see and grasp the overall plot structure of the thing. But what I never really got was the why. Why are so many people angry? Why are these children being treated so poorly? Why is this suddenly introduced character all of a sudden leading an invasion? Who are these witches and why are they bothering? Who are these angels and why are they so angry? Why are there roller skating elephants? Why is there a woman using dowsing rods to travel between worlds? Why are any of these people worthy or special? Why is Lin-Manuel Miranda in this show? Why are people both terrified by and in constant pursuit of something called dust? Oh yeah, what the heck is dust? So yeah, things happen, and that's the show. Well, things happen in a lot of really pretty locations, and there's lots of movement, and lots of really bad parenting, and then some stuff happens in hell, or the dust waiting room, or whatever, and that's the show. And I know I'm making it all sound bad, and it really isn't. Things got better when I just gave up on trying to figure things out and kept my phone at the ready and looked everything up as I watched. It turns out, this is the author, Philip Pullman's run at taking Paradise Lost and turning it into a children's allegory in the vein of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you aren't familiar with the classic poem, Paradise Lost is basically John Milton's attempt to turn Satan into a tragic hero. Once I had this essential bit of context, a lot of the show made more sense, like characters being called Eve and serpents and other heavy-handed callbacks to the Bible. And yeah, it's very heavy-handed, but it's also more interesting, at least if you fall into the category of literary nerds who like making connections between works, and I am one such nerd. There really is a lot to like in the show. Like I said, the child actors are good all around and really grow into their roles as they literally grow up through the production. James McAvoy makes a splendid Satan analog, as he is truly awful for much of his time and doesn't do much of merit. This may be the only time McAvoy, an actor I truly enjoy, is made to be so unlikable. Ruth Wilson as Mrs. Coulter is equally awful but ever enthralling in her scenes. She has an intensity that makes her a treat to watch, especially as she puts so many gross men in their place. She may be a mess, but she's also badass. Daphne Keane displays a range and physicality that really keeps the show moving and worth watching, especially in the final season. Her ability to convey hurt and happiness with equal range was impressive. After the main plot of the story ends with an incoherent conflict and climax in which there are confusing stakes, seriously, Miss Coulter's demon may have gotten my deepest reaction in the entire final battle. The show closes with a lengthy denouement in which the two main characters are finally able to explore their suppressed feelings for each other. In this time, lots of really convenient things happen, but also some truly beautiful moments too. The roller skating elephants and their tree houses, along with all the multiverses, are saved by Mary, the former nun turned matchmaker. I know, that sounds silly, and it is, but it's also lovely, and there is genuine chemistry between Keane and Amir Wilson, her co-lead. So, I think what the story is about is that we should let kids be kids, and maybe they'll fall in love, and maybe that's okay. Or maybe it's about not being afraid of the power of creation, even when we are unsure of the outcome. Or maybe it's about the resilience of kids despite terrible absent parents. Or maybe it's about the corruptive potential of rigid faith and the occasional need to shake things up, or maybe even start over from scratch. I don't really know because I didn't read the books, but it's okay. Because there's a polar bear who wears armor and can fix magical knives. And also, our souls are actually animals. That's it for this episode. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions, please send them to me via social media or to the Finlos Lives email, which is finloslives@gmail.com. Or you can leave me a voicemail via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to our next conversation.